I never thought I'd walk into my own grandmother's funeral and see her face on a glowing screen, alive, begging for help. I never thought I'd be the one to play that truth for an entire church full of people, including my father, who had sworn to me she died in a car accident. And when my mother finally broke down screaming, then who's in the coffin? All I could do was stand there in my dress blues, Grandma's frail hand wrapped tight around mine, and stare at them. I didn't shed a single tear. Not for them. Not anymore. But before that moment, before the truth split, my family wide open, there were years of silence. 5 years, where I stayed away from my hometown of Abilene, Texas. 5 years since I'd walked out of my parents' house after my father told me I was nothing but a disgrace, a girl pretending to be a soldier. 5 years since I swore I wouldn't come back, not until I had proven him wrong. Back then, I was 22, fresh out of high school, trying to find my way. My older brother Michael was the golden boy. He'd gone straight into Dad's real estate business, wearing suits before he was old enough to drink, shaking hands with local politicians, already being groomed as heir. My mom, Caroline, adored him. She would brag to the neighbors, "My son's going to be the next big developer in Texas." And me, I was the girl. The one who should have married young, settled down, maybe taught Sunday school, but I wasn't wired that way. Something in me burned for more. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the long nights when Grandma held me and told me, "You have the same fire your grandfather had when he came home from the war. Don't let anyone snuff it out." My grandpa, Samuel Hayes, was a Korean War veteran. He died before I was born, at least that's what I had always been told. Grandma kept his folded flag in a glass case on her mantel right above the old Bible with his name inside the cover. She told me stories of his quiet strength, how he carried wounded men off the battlefield, how he never boasted, how he came home scarred, but determined to raise his family with honor. When I was a little girl, I used to run my fingers over that wooden triangle case and whisper, "One day, I'll make you proud too." It was Grandma who drove me to the recruiter's office. She was in her 80s, then hands trembling on the steering wheel, but her voice steady. "They'll tell you you're too small, too fragile," she said, glancing at me with that piercing look of hers. "But they don't know you like I do. You've got steel in your spine. You'll be the fighter I wish I'd been." I never forgot that, especially the night Dad screamed at me. He'd had a few bourbons like always. The house smelled of smoke and leather polish, the same smell it had when I was a kid. I told him I was joining the Marines, and he laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. "The Marines. You'll never make it past day one, Sarah. You're not a warrior. You're just a girl who should have learned how to be a wife instead of pretending to be a man." That was it for me. My blood went cold, my throat clenched, and I remember Grandma's hand squeezing mine under the table. Her cloudy blue eyes were shining with tears, but she didn't say a word. She didn't have to. That was the last night I slept under that roof. The next morning, before the sun was up, I packed a duffel bag and left. I didn't even say goodbye. I joined the Marines, and for 5 years I built a life out of discipline, sweat, and pain. Every pull-up, every mile run, every sleepless night on duty, I carried the memory of Grandma's voice in my chest. She didn't forget me. Even when my parents refused to answer my calls, Grandma would find a way. Sometimes I'd get a handwritten letter on yellow stationery tucked into my duffel by a visiting sergeant who ran into a sweet old lady in town. Sometimes she'd show up on base wrapped in her faded blue shawl, carrying a Tupperware full of cornbread or cookies. The guys in my unit loved her. They joked that she was our unofficial platoon grandma. But the last 2 times I saw her, something wasn't right. Her hands were colder. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She kept glancing down, avoiding my gaze like she was holding back a secret. I tried to press her, but she'd just shake her head and whisper, "Don't worry about me, baby. Just promise me you'll stand tall." And then, nothing. 2 months of silence. No letters, no visits, no phone calls. My gut twisted every night in the barracks. I told myself she was probably just sick or tired, or maybe my mom had finally stopped her from coming. Then one late night the phone rang. It was my father. His voice was flat, almost rehearsed. "Sarah," he said, "your grandmother passed away. Car accident. Quick. You don't need to rush home. We'll take care of the funeral. I sat there on the edge of my bunk, clutching the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. My brothers were in the background, murmuring something I couldn't make out. And then I heard my mother's laugh. Light, careless, as if nothing had happened. I wanted to scream to demand answers, but the Marine in me knew better. You don't charge into a battle blind. You gather intel, you wait, and then, when the time is right, you strike. So I hung up. And for the first time in years, I prayed the way Grandma taught me when I was a little girl, kneeling by her bedside. Lord, give me the strength to see the truth, even if it hurts. I was 22 the night I walked out of my father's house. The fight had started the way most fights in our family did, something small, something stupid, a spark that lit a fire we all pretended wasn't there until it roared through the living room. It was Thanksgiving night in Abilene, Texas. The turkey had been carved, the mashed potatoes congealed on plates, and my brother Michael was holding court at the head of the table, like he was some kind of king. He was 2 years older than me, already wearing a tailored gray suit, the kind of suit that looked like it had been custom cut by a Fifth Avenue tailor, instead of a local department store. Dad beamed with pride every time Michael spoke, nodding along as if every word out of his mouth was scripture. And then there was me. Sarah Hayes, the daughter, the one who'd chosen a badge and a gun over law school, who had no interest in being groomed for Dad's real estate empire, the one who didn't fit neatly into my parents' plan. Look at your brother, Dad said that night, his glass of bourbon tilting dangerously in his hand. His cheeks were flushed, his voice booming across the dining room table. He's making real money, he's making a name. And then, there's you. He waved toward me with that same glass spilling a drop on the tablecloth. Playing soldier, pretending you can do a man's job. I felt my stomach twist. I'd heard it before, but that night it was sharper, nastier. I tried to laugh it off, but the words stuck like barbed wire in my chest. Mom didn't say a thing. She was too busy texting under the table, her face glowing from the phone's light. I knew she was messaging her friend, the man I'd seen her with downtown. I wanted her to defend me. I wanted her to say, she's our daughter. She's strong. She's brave. But she just kept tapping at her phone, pretending not to hear. It was Grandma who reached for my hand under the table. Her skin was paper thin, her fingers trembling, but the grip had strength in it. She looked at me with those pale blue eyes, the same eyes that had seen war, poverty, and the loss of her husband, and whispered, "Don't let them break you, baby." That was all it took. The tears burned my eyes, but I swallowed them. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked out of that house. I didn't pack much, just a duffel bag, a pair of boots, and Grandpa's old pocket Bible that Grandma had pressed into my hand as I hugged her goodbye. I didn't come back for 5 years. Those 5 years changed me in ways my family never believed possible. The Marine Corps took the raw anger I carried and hammered it into something harder, sharper. Boot camp broke me down and rebuilt me piece by piece. Every mile I ran, every drill I pushed through, every night I slept with my rifle across my chest, I felt Grandpa beside me. I heard his voice in the stories Grandma used to tell. He never gave up. He kept going. So will you. Out on deployment in the deserts of Iraq, in the mountains of Afghanistan, I saw the worst of humanity and the best. I learned that strength wasn't about how loud you yelled at the dinner table. It was about standing steady when everyone else crumbled. It was about holding a friend's hand as the medics worked about making decisions you'd carry with you forever. Through it all, Grandma never forgot me. Letters would arrive in my duffel. The envelopes faintly scented with lavender soap, her shaky handwriting looping across the paper. Sometimes it was just a few lines. "I'm proud of you. Don't forget who you are." Other times, she would slip me $20 or $50 money she really couldn't spare on her small widow's pension with a note that said, "For your boots, honey, I want you walking strong." The guys in my unit loved her letters. They'd gather around listening as I read them out loud in the barracks. "Dear Sarah, I baked an apple pie today, but it didn't taste right without you here. Come home safe and we'll share one together." They started calling her Grandma Hayes, like she belonged to all of us. And in a way she did. She gave me and them something to fight for beyond ourselves. But time is cruel, and even the strongest souls can wither when they're not loved. The last time she came to see me, she looked different. Thinner, frailer. Her hands shook more than I'd ever seen. She smiled, but her eyes had shadows, a sadness she couldn't hide. I asked her grandma, "What's wrong?" She just patted my hand and whispered, "Don't worry about me, baby. You just keep standing tall." That was the last time I saw her for a long while. 2 months passed, with no letters, no calls, no quiet knock on my apartment door. I told myself she was just tired. She was 90 now. Maybe it was harder to get around. But every night, when I took off my badge and gun, when I lay in the silence of my little apartment, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. Something wasn't right. Then came the phone call. I was finishing a late shift the Texas night, stretching wide and quiet when my phone buzzed. I saw my dad's number on the screen. My throat went dry. "Sarah," he said, voice low, steady rehearsed. "I thought you should know. Your grandmother? She died. Car accident. It was quick." For a second, I couldn't even breathe. My chest locked up. My knees gave out, and I had to sit on the curb outside the station. Dead. My grandma. Just like that. What I whispered. "It's done," he said, as if he were closing a business deal. "We'll handle the arrangements. No need for you to come rushing back. You've got your life now. We'll take care of it." And then faintly, through the line, I heard laughter. My mother's laugh. Light. Carefree. Like nothing had happened. My mind screamed. If Grandma had died in some accident, why hadn't anyone called me sooner? Why hadn't the hospital reached out? Why was my mother laughing while my father declared the matriarch of our family dead? I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just listened, then hung up. My heart was breaking in silence, but my training told me something else. When something doesn't add up, you investigate. You don't accept the story. You find the truth. That night, I opened my laptop, the same one I would carry into that funeral, and began pulling every string I knew. Hospital records, traffic cameras, old contacts from my military police days. And slowly, the first threads of a dark secret began to unravel. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment the rift in my family would crack wide open. The morning after my father's phone call, I sat in the squad car long after my shift ended, staring out at the empty parking lot. The words kept ringing in my ears. She died. Car accident. It was quick, quick. Like that one word was supposed to soften the blow. Like it was some kind of mercy that I never got to say goodbye. But the problem was, I couldn't stop seeing Grandma's face the last time I had visited her. It had been in the small diner off Pine Street just outside of town. She'd ordered chicken fried steak, her favorite, but only pushed the food around her plate. Her hands shook when she tried to lift the fork, and the smile she gave me didn't reach her eyes. She looked deflated. Not sick exactly, but like the life had been drained from her spirit. "Grandma, are you okay?" I had whispered. We were sitting in that corner booth, the one with the cracked red leather seat. She gave me a quick squeeze on the hand. "Don't you worry about me, baby girl. You just keep doing what you're doing. Stand tall. That's all I need to see." I should have pressed her. I should have asked harder questions. Why was she thinner? Why did she look over her shoulder like she was afraid of someone watching her? But back then, I was still raw. Still angry at my parents. I figured maybe the tension at home had finally worn her down. I didn't realize it was worse than that. 2 months later, after that late night call from Dad, I couldn't shake the feeling. Something about his voice was wrong. Too smooth. Too rehearsed. He didn't cry. He didn't sound broken. And Mom? God, the sound of her laugh in the background haunted me. I started digging. At first, I told myself it was just to find closure, but deep down, I knew I didn't believe him. I called Hendrickson's funeral home, the only one in Abilene. "Hi, this is Sarah Hayes," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "I heard there was a service scheduled for a Mrs. Eleanor Hayes. Can you confirm the details?" The woman on the phone said, "Yes, ma'am. Service is this Saturday, 2 p.m. Closed casket. Your father said the condition, well, that it was best not to open it." I nearly dropped the phone. Closed casket, just like I feared. I'd been to enough military funerals to know what that meant: nothing to see, nothing to question. Anyone could be in that box. Or no one at all. I drove to the county clerk's office the next morning, still in uniform, so nobody would think to turn me away. I asked for the accident report. The clerk, a kid who looked like he had just graduated college, typed in Grandma's name, then frowned. "I'm sorry, Officer Hayes. There's no fatal accident report under that name. The last thing I see here is a medical transfer. 2 months ago, to a nursing facility in Nolan County." Nolan County. That was nearly an hour away, tucked behind a line of cotton fields and oil pumps, the kind of place most people in town forgot existed. My pulse hammered in my ears. I thanked him, walked out, and sat in my car. My hands were shaking as badly as Grandma's had been. A nursing home. Dad said she was dead, but he had her sent away. I remembered her thin arms, the way she'd whispered, "Don't let them break you." My father had lied. My mother had laughed. And my grandmother. She was out there somewhere, alive, alone, and abandoned. That night, I barely slept. I pulled every string I had left from my Marine days. I called an old buddy in DPS who owed me a favor, asked him to pull traffic camera footage from Nolan County for the last 60 days. I searched hospital intakes, cross-referenced patient transfers, and combed through records. And there it was, grainy footage from a gas station off Highway 20, time-stamped exactly 2 months ago. My father's Cadillac Escalade pulled up its headlights, cutting through the dark. He got out, opened the back door, and helped Grandma out. She was in her nightgown, shivering, clutching her little blue shawl. She looked terrified, confused. He didn't hug her. He didn't even look her in the eye. He just led her toward the nursing home doors and walked away. The camera caught her turning back, one hand outstretched, mouthing something. The audio was faint, but with the right software, I cleaned it up. And then I heard it. "Please, don't leave me here. Please." My throat closed. My vision blurred. I slammed the laptop shut, pressed my palms against my eyes, and forced myself not to cry. Not now. I knew 2 things in that moment. 1, Grandma was alive. 2, my father was a liar. The next day, I drove out to Nolan County. The road stretched long and flat cotton fields on either side, broken only by rusted fences and windmills that no longer turned. The nursing home sat at the end of a gravel driveway, its paint-peeling windows clouded with dust. The sign out front was missing letters, OAKVLYCAE. Inside, the smell hit me first. Bleach-old urine, something sour underneath. The halls were dim, the linoleum floor cracked. I flashed my badge at the nurse behind the counter. She looked startled, then nervous. "I'm looking for a resident," I said. "Eleanor Hayes." Her eyes flicked to the logbook, then to me, then back down. Room 14, end of the hall." I walked faster than I meant to. My boots echoed on the tile. When I pushed the door open, I froze. Grandma was there. Her tiny body looked lost in a metal-framed bed, like she was sinking into the sheets. Her hair was thinner, her skin pale, but her eyes, those same pale blue eyes, fluttered open when she heard me. "Sarah." Her voice cracked, raw but unmistakable. I dropped to my knees beside her bed. "It's me, Grandma. I'm here." Her hand found mine, fragile but still strong in spirit. Tears welled in her eyes. "I knew you'd come. I prayed every night. But, baby, I'm so tired. They left me here like I was already gone." My chest ached so badly I thought it might split. I kissed her forehead, still warm, still alive. They lied. They buried her alive in words before she was even gone. That night, as I held her hand and listened to her shallow breathing in that cold, neglected room, my anger settled into something sharper. Not wild, not loud. A steady burn. The kind you carry close to the chest until the moment comes to unleash it. And I knew exactly when that moment would be. I've always believed that gut feelings are just instincts we haven't learned to name yet. The Corps taught me to listen to mine. Out in the desert, a twinge in my stomach once made me step back a single second before an IED went off where my boot would have been. That same twinge returned the night I saw Grandma's name in the transfer log and listened to her frail voice whisper, "Please, don't leave me here from that grainy video feed." It didn't feel like grief. It felt like a warning. The next morning, I went back to the nursing home. Badge in my pocket, heart pounding in my chest like I was stepping into a raid. The staff at the front desk smiled too quickly, then glanced at each other. That nervous flicker in their eyes told me everything. They knew. They knew this wasn't right. Room 14. The receptionist said again, softer this time, as if hoping I wouldn't notice her trembling hands. When I walked in, Grandma was awake, sitting on the bed with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The room smelled of disinfectant and wilted flowers. Her hair was thinner than I remembered, and her cheeks had sunken, but the light in her eyes was still there. She reached for me the way she used to when I was a little girl. "Sarah?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "I prayed you'd find me." I dropped to my knees beside her bed, taking her hand in both of mine. "Grandma, you're not dead," he told me. My throat closed up. Her lips trembled. "Your father said that, didn't he? He told me it would be easier. Easier for him. Easier for your mother. Easier for you." Easier. My voice shook with fury. "He told me you died in an accident, Grandma. He told the whole town. He's planning a funeral." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I told him I didn't want to go to that place," she said, glancing around the dim, peeling wallpaper, the cracked blinds, the stained linoleum. "But he said it was done. He left me here like a box he didn't want anymore. He said I'd had my time." I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. I wanted to storm out of that building and drive straight to my parents' house, badge and handcuffs ready. But something in her voice, quiet, steady, despite the years, held me back. "I'm getting you out of here," I said. "Tonight." She shook her head weakly. "Sarah, don't get yourself in trouble for me." "Trouble?" I almost laughed. "Grandma, I am the trouble!" That night, I went back to my apartment and pulled up the security footage again. I didn't just watch it, I dissected it like evidence in a case file. Zoomed in on the license plate of Dad's Escalade. Paused on the timestamp. Enhanced the audio until Grandma's whispers came through like a ghost in the speakers. Then I pulled county property records. 2 months ago, the same week Grandma supposedly died, my father filed a petition to transfer ownership of her house and land into his company's name. The paperwork said deceased. But the signature on the form, I knew that handwriting. I'd seen it in countless birthday cards in the recipes she wrote out for me when I left home. It was hers. He had her sign her own death papers. My stomach churned with rage. This wasn't just neglect. This was betrayal, fraud, and cruelty all rolled into one. A man who used to tell war stories about his father. My grandfather, the man he claimed died a hero, had tossed his own mother into a place that smelled of bleach and loneliness just so he could get her house a little faster. And my mother, she signed as witness. Her perfect cursive sat right there beside Grandma's shaky scrawl. I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling, my badge sitting on the nightstand. Justice was supposed to live in courtrooms, in procedures and paperwork. But this wasn't just about law. This was about dignity, about truth, about the woman who had been the only light in my childhood. I could already hear my father's voice echoing in that church, reciting lines he probably rehearsed in the mirror. She was a woman of grace, a pillar of our family. She will be missed. Lies, every word of it. Lies meant to impress neighbors, to protect his reputation as a pillar of the community. I decided then I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't cause a scene in the way he expected. I would do what Marines do. We don't just fight with our fists, we fight with strategy, with evidence, with patience. So I made my plan. Step 1. Get Grandma out of that hellhole of a nursing home. Quietly. Paperwork in hand. A friend in social services owed me a favor, and with the right documentation, we could transfer her legally into my care. Step 2. Gather evidence, I copied every file, every receipt, every signature onto multiple drives. I downloaded the video in every format I could think of, saved it on my phone, my laptop, and a cloud backup. My father's lies weren't just immoral. They were criminal. Step 3. Choose the moment. He wanted to control the narrative by staging a funeral, presenting himself as the grieving son. Fine. Let him gather the entire town, all his business partners. The pastor, my mother, even Michael with his smug grin. Let them all be there when I tear down his mask. And finally, step 4. Decide what kind of justice I wanted. This was the hardest part. The Marine in me wanted to put cuffs on him, drag him out in front of everyone, and list his charges one by one. Elder neglect fraud. Emotional abuse. I could see the headlines already. Local real estate mogul arrested at mother's funeral. It would destroy him. But the granddaughter in me, the girl who used to fall asleep in grandma's lap, listening to her hum hymns, remembered something. Sarah grandma had told me more than once, revenge will eat you alive. Sometimes the worst punishment is letting someone live with what they've done. I didn't want to believe that. Not then. Not with rage pumping in my veins. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew she was right. My father thrived on control on appearances. If I stripped that away in front of everyone, he'd be left with nothing but shame. No courtroom could give him a harsher sentence than that. So I packed my dress blues, polished my shoes until they shone like mirrors, and charged the battery on my laptop. I was going home for Grandma's funeral, only this time I wasn't going back as the disgrace my father had thrown away. I was coming back as Officer Sarah Hayes, his daughter, his disappointment, and his reckoning. The church on Hickory Street hadn't changed in the 5 years I'd been gone. Same white clapboard siding, same crooked steeple, same bell that rang too loud for such a small town. I parked my cruiser across the street and just sat there for a moment, staring at the line of cars wrapped around the block. The whole town had shown up for Grandma's funeral. They believed she was gone. They believed my father's story. I tightened the strap of my hat, smoothed the front of my dress blues, and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The young girl who had stormed out of that house 5 years ago was gone. The woman staring back at me had sand in her hair from Iraq scars, on her hands from training, and eyes that had learned to stay steady, even when the world was falling apart. Inside the church, the air smelled of lilies and candle wax. Hymns played softly from the organ, and the murmur of voices filled the pews. Old friends, neighbors, church folks I hadn't seen since high school, all dressed in their Sunday best, all gathered to mourn the woman who wasn't even dead. My father stood near the altar, his broad shoulders stiff under his dark suit. His hair had gone whiter, but his posture was the same back, straight chin, high as if he were still the sheriff of this town, not just a man with too much money and too little heart. My brother Michael was at his side, whispering in his ear. Mom sat in the front pew, a black veil draped over her face, though I could see the smear of lipstick on her teeth, and the quick glance she threw toward the back where her so-called friend sat a few rows away. I stayed in the shadow of the doorway watching. My stomach churned, but my mind was cold, precise. The USB drive was tucked into my uniform pocket, small but heavy, like a bullet waiting for the chamber. When the pastor finally nodded, Dad stepped forward. He cleared his throat, his voice echoing off the rafters. My mother was a good woman, he began. She lived a long life. She loved her family, and we loved her. She's gone now, but she'll live forever in our hearts. I almost laughed at the hypocrisy. He hadn't visited her in years. He'd left her in a place where the paint peeled off the walls and the staff looked the other way. He wanted this crowd to see him as a devoted son, grieving noble. He wanted them to keep shaking his hand, signing his contracts, voting for him in the next county election. I gripped the edge of the pew in front of me, my nails digging into the worn wood. The man at the coffin. My father, Thomas Hayes, had once taught me how to ride a bike, how to throw a baseball. He'd also told me I was worthless, that he wished I'd been born a boy, that I would never measure up to him or Michael. And now, here he was making a show of tears. He didn't feel eulogizing the very woman he'd abandoned. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her other hand resting lightly on her lover's arm. They thought they had won. They thought I would stay gone, licking my wounds in silence. The pastor invited the family to come forward. Michael stood tall, chest puffed out in his expensive suit. He put an arm around Mom, guiding her up the aisle. Dad stood at the casket, his hand pressed to the wood as if he couldn't bear to let go. The congregation sighed, sniffled. Some women dabbed their eyes, whispering about what a tragedy it was, what a loss for the community. I felt my heart beat slow. The moment had come. I stepped into the aisle. My polished shoes echoed against the old wooden floor, sharp against the hush of the organ. Heads began to turn. Murmurs rose as people recognized me. "That's Sarah, isn't it? Tom's daughter, the one who ran off to the Marines." I walked slowly, shoulders squared, every inch of me in uniform. I carried my laptop in my left hand, the glow of its screen lighting my face. Dad froze mid-sentence when he saw me. His eyes widened, then narrowed into slits. He recovered quickly, forcing a smile. "And here she is," he said into the microphone. "My daughter come home to say goodbye to her grandmother." Goodbye. The word almost made me choke. I wanted to scream, to shout, "She's not dead, you liar!" But I held my tongue. My plan required silence until the right second. I walked past the pews, past the whispers and stares, and stood in front of the altar. Dad's smile had turned brittle. His hand twitched at his side as though he wanted to shove me out of the way, but knew the town was watching. I looked straight at him, then turned to the congregation. My voice carried steady, trained to command. "This funeral," I said, "is a lie." Gasps rippled through the pews. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket, slid it into the laptop, and tapped the screen. The projector hummed to life, casting blue light across the church walls. The video flickered, grainy and raw. My father's Cadillac pulled into frame. The doors opened, and there she was, Grandma in her nightgown, clutching her shawl, her eyes wide with fear. On the recording, you could hear her faint voice, "Please, don't leave me here, please." The church went dead, silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Gasps turned into horrified whispers. Every head in the room swiveled toward my father. I watched the blood drain from his face. Mom's veil trembled as her hand shot to her mouth. Then as the footage looped, showing Grandma pleading again and again, she broke. Her voice cut through the silence, high and ragged. "Then who's in the coffin?" The organ player stopped cold. The room felt like it tilted on its axis. People stood from the pews, craning their necks to see inside the closed casket at the front of the church. And me, I just stood there, my hand resting on the laptop, my other on the polished brim of my cap. My jaw was locked, my eyes dry. The storm inside me didn't show on my face. Because this was just the beginning. The silence in the church was the kind that weighed heavy on the skin, pressing down on every chest in the room. Even the air felt still, like the world itself was holding its breath. The projector kept looping the video, Grandma's frail voice, begging, "Please, don't leave me here." Each time the words echoed off the sanctuary walls, they cut deeper, like a blade turning in the wound. Dad's hand dropped from the closed casket. He glanced at me, then back at the screen, then out over the congregation, as if he could will them not to believe what they were seeing. His jaw flexed. The confident man who had been boasting about his mother's wonderful life only seconds before now looked like a liar caught mid-sentence. "Sarah," he said, voice cracking, microphone squealing with feedback. This is taken out of context. You don't understand what you're doing." I stared at him. My hands steady my face, unreadable. "I understand perfectly," I said. My voice carried train to command attention. "You told this entire town my grandmother was dead. You told me she died in an accident. You had a funeral for her. But as you all just saw..." I pointed at the screen where Grandma's voice repeated her desperate plea. "She's still alive." A wave of whispers and gasps rolled through the church. Heads turned, eyes wide, mouths hanging open. Pastor Collins stepped back from the podium, his face pale as parchment. My mother's veil quivered. She clutched her pearls with one hand, the tissue with the other. "Thomas," she hissed, not realizing the microphone was still close enough to catch her words. "You told me." "Quiet!" Dad snapped under his breath, but it was too late. The congregation heard. Someone from the back pew called out, "What do you mean? She's alive? Tom, what the hell is going on?" Another voice, "We deserve answers." Dad raised his hands, trying to quiet the crowd. Listen, everyone. My mother was confused. She insisted on staying at home, but she was endangering herself. She wandered into the road. I had to protect her, so I made arrangements. It was for her own good. "Protect her," I cut in. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but my voice stayed cool. "By lying to your own daughter, by staging a funeral for a woman who is still breathing." His face reddened. "You left. You don't know what it's been like. She didn't even remember who you were." "She remembered," I snapped. "She remembered me. She came to see me even when you told her not to. And I found her dad. I found her locked away in a nursing home that smelled like a cage. I held her hand last night." A sharp intake of breath went through the room. I could feel the weight of 100 eyes pressing down on us. Michael finally spoke up, his voice tight. "This is slander. She's just angry because she wasn't included. She walked away. She doesn't deserve anything." I turned to him, my eyes narrowing. "This isn't about money, Michael. It never was. This is about what you did to the only person who ever loved me. You let her rot away in that place so you could get her house, her savings, everything she built with Grandpa after he came home from Korea. And you thought no one would find out." Dad slammed his hand on the casket, making the flowers jump. "Enough," he barked. "This is a funeral, not a courtroom. Shut that laptop off before you embarrass yourself any further." I took a slow step forward. Embarrassed myself, I turned the screen so it faced the crowd. Grandma's voice echoed again. "Please, don't leave me here." People in the pews started to murmur louder. Old Mr. Daniels' grandpa's war buddy from the VFW hall stood up and pointed at my father. "You told us she was gone, Tom. We mourned her already. And you put her in a place like that." His voice cracked with rage. For the first time in my life, I saw my father stumble. His hand shook. His perfect facade was slipping, and he knew it. Mom finally rose from the pew, her veil slipping off. Her makeup streaked as she shrieked, "If she's alive, then who's in the coffin?" Her words echoed, bouncing around the vaulted ceiling. The congregation gasped again, louder this time. A couple of women clutched their husbands' arms. A child began to cry. I didn't answer her. I just looked at Dad. His face had gone white as the lilies on the altar. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. He looked like a man suddenly stripped naked in front of the whole town. In that moment, I felt no pity, no grief, no tears came, only a cold clarity, the same kind I'd felt on missions overseas. When the lies fall apart, when the enemy finally sees you're not afraid, that's when the real battle begins. I could feel the flash drive in my pocket, a small weight that might as well have been a gavel. Evidence, truth, justice. Everything Grandma had ever taught me about standing tall was right there in my hand. The crowd waited for my next move. So did my father. He was daring me with his silence to either expose him fully or back down and let him keep control. I smiled, just a thin, cold smile, and set the laptop back on the podium. My silence was louder than any words, because I hadn't played my final card yet. The church was too quiet. Even the children, usually fidgeting in the back pews, sat frozen, their wide eyes fixed on the screen glowing against the altar wall. The projector hummed, and once again the grainy footage rolled. Headlights cut across cracked pavement. My father's Cadillac Escalade slid into view, sleek and polished, even in the poor light. The door opened, and then she appeared, my grandmother, my Eleanor. Thin, stooped, wrapped in her shawl, her lips moving desperately. The boosted audio filled the sanctuary like a funeral bell tolling over the living. "Please, don't leave me here. Please." The words echoed raw, fragile, the kind of plea that pierces bone. Gasps broke out across the pews. Mrs. Whitaker clutched her neighbor's hand. A boy whispered, "That's her," before his mother hushed him, her own face pale. Pastor Collins gripped the pulpit so tightly, his knuckles whitened. I kept my gaze on my father, his face drained of color, his usual politician smile crumbling. He looked smaller already, but still he tried. "She was confused," he said, voice breaking. "You don't know what you're watching." She didn't know what she was saying. I stepped closer to the screen laptop glowing in my hand. Confused. She knew exactly what she was saying. And you knew exactly what you were doing. You told this entire town she died in an accident, but she was alive, begging you not to leave her. Murmurs swelled, rising like a storm. Old Mr. Daniels' grandpa's friend from the VFW struggled to his feet. His cane rattled against the floor as he pointed a trembling finger. "Tom, I trusted you. We all did. And you buried your own mother in words before she was even gone." My father's jaw clenched. He snapped back. "You don't understand what it was like. She wandered. She forgot things. She was a danger to herself." "No!" I cut him off, voice sharp as a blade. "She remembered me. She remembered everything you wanted to forget. And instead of loving her, you locked her away. And then you lied." The video looped again, Grandma's frail body caught in headlights, her hand reaching out toward the camera. The sound of her voice, "Please, don't leave me here," ripped through the silence like a hymn twisted into lament. My mother finally rose, swaying in her heels veil, slipping back to show her streaked face. "Thomas," she gasped, her voice breaking, "you told me." "Be quiet," he barked, his mask slipping. But it was too late. Everyone had heard. A man in the back shouted, "Then open the casket." Another joined in, "Yeah, if Eleanor's really gone, prove it." The pastor looked at my father, then at me, then back at the coffin. The weight of the room pressed down. You could feel the tide turning respect crumbling into suspicion. My father's hand shot out, gripping the mahogany lid. "No!" He barked, sweat running down his temple. "It stays shut. It's better this way." Gasps swept the pews. My mother's hands trembled, clutching her pearls. And then she screamed, her voice raw and jagged, echoing against the rafters. "If she's alive, then who's in the coffin?" The words cracked through the sanctuary like thunder. People stood from their seats. Some covered their mouths. Others craned their necks to peer toward the front. Children began to cry, clinging to their mothers. I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. The question itself was a weapon cutting deeper than anything I could have said. I looked at my father. His face had gone chalk white, his lips pressed into a thin line. He looked at me, then at the casket, then out at the crowd. For the first time, Thomas Hayes had no script, no smooth words, just silence. And in that silence, I stood taller, my dress blues gleaming under the sanctuary lights. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just let the truth sit heavy, pressing down on him, pressing down on all of them. Because the real reckoning hadn't walked through those doors yet. The echoes of my mother's scream still hung in the rafters. If she's alive, then who's in the coffin? The congregation erupted, some shouting, some crying, some whispering prayers under their breath. The organist's hands hovered frozen above the keys. The funeral director stood rigid near the wall, sweat dotting his bald head. And my father, Thomas Hayes, gripped the casket lid like it was the only thing holding him upright. Then the doors at the back of First Baptist groaned open. A cold draft swept down the aisle, flickering the candles, carrying the sharp scent of February air. Heads turned, pews creaked, and gasps rippled like a wave. She stood there. My grandmother, 90 years old, stooped but unbroken, her blue shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her wooden cane steadying each step. Snowflakes still clung to her hair, glittering like stars against the sanctuary's dim light. For an instant, the whole room seemed to believe they were seeing a ghost. I moved before I even realized it, my shoes striking sharp against the floor as I went to her side. "Grandma," I whispered, sliding my arm beneath hers. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I saw them shine. "Sarah," she breathed, her voice trembling but sure, "I told myself you'd find me." "I did," I said, my throat tightening, "and I'm not letting you go again." Together, we walked down the aisle. Her cane tapped against the wood, slow but steady. Each sound echoed through the silence like a gavel striking. People rose to their feet, craning their necks, tears welling as they realized the truth with their own eyes. "She's alive," someone whispered. "My Lord," another murmured. At the front, Dad staggered back, color drained from his face. Michael's fists clenched at his sides, his lips curled in panic. My mother collapsed back onto the pew mascara, streaking her cheeks, her body heaving with sobs that sounded more like guilt than grief. Grandma stopped in front of the casket, facing the man who had left her to die alone. Pastor Collins, pale as parchment, held out the microphone with trembling hands. She gripped her cane with one hand and the microphone with the other. Her voice was frail, but in the silence it carried like thunder. "Thomas," she said, looking straight at her son, "you told them I was gone. You told my granddaughter I was dead. But the truth is, I already died the day you left me in that nursing home." Gasps swept the sanctuary. People shook their heads, tears spilling freely. A woman near the front clasped her Bible to her chest. My father's lips moved, but no words came out. His eyes darted desperate, searching for an escape. Grandma's gaze didn't waver. Her next words came softer, but sharper still. "You buried me long before this day. You buried me when you chose greed over love. But I will not bury you in return." She turned her pale eyes, sweeping the congregation before settling back on him. "I forgive you. Not for your sake, Thomas. For mine. For Sarah's. Because the heaviest prison you'll ever live in is your own conscience." Her hand trembled as she lowered the microphone. The silence that followed was deafening. Men wiped their eyes with calloused hands. Women clutched tissues, whispering prayers. Even the children, wide-eyed, seemed to understand something holy had passed through the room. I stood beside her, my back straight, my uniform gleaming in the dim light. My father sagged against the casket, his shoulders heavy, his head bowed. Not a single word left his lips. He didn't need to speak. His ruin was written across his face. My mother sobbed openly, the man beside her, sliding farther down the pew to avoid the weight of her shame. Michael stared at the floor, lips pressed tight, every inch of his arrogance stripped away. And me, I didn't cry. Not one tear. Because in that moment, justice wasn't in handcuffs or jail time. It was in truth spoken softly, but heard louder than any gavel. It was in watching the man who had mocked me, belittled me, erase himself with his own lies. I slipped my arm around Grandma again. She leaned into me, frail but still standing. Together we turned toward the doors. The church was still full, but the air felt lighter now, as though the truth had blown through and carried the lies away. Behind us, the casket still sat, unopened lilies wilting on top. A coffin full of nothing, just like my father's words. The sanctuary was so quiet, I could hear the soft creak of the wooden pews as people shifted in their seats. My grandmother's words still floated in the air like incense. The heaviest prison you'll ever live in is your own conscience. I looked at my father. For years, I had imagined confronting him, imagined shouting, imagined dragging him into court. But seeing him now, shoulders bent, head lowered, sweat shining on his forehead under the sanctuary lights, I realized none of that was necessary. He had already sentenced himself. His reputation gone, his mask shattered, and every pair of eyes in that church, neighbors and friends who had once trusted him, now saw the man he truly was. That was punishment enough. My mother wept into her hands, her body shaking, the sound raw and animal-like. Michael stared at the floor, lips pressed together, every inch of his arrogance stripped away. The man who once bragged about being Dad's heir now looked like a child caught stealing. I didn't cry, not one tear. Instead, I felt the weight of Grandma's hand tighten in mine. Fragile, yes, but firm, steady, like it had been all my life. She leaned against me, and I could hear her whisper under her breath, meant only for me. Stand tall, baby, always. So I did. I lifted my chin, squared my shoulders, and guided her toward the back of the church. Every eye followed us. Some full of tears, some full of anger, some full of awe. Men tipped their hats. Women reached for tissues. Children whispered questions their parents couldn't answer. The sound of her cane against the wooden floor echoed louder than my father's eulogy had. Louder than the hymns that had filled this place at the start. Louder than the lies that had once convinced an entire town that Eleanor Hayes was gone. When we reached the heavy oak doors, I paused. Just once, I turned back. My father hadn't moved. He was still slumped against the coffin, the same coffin that symbolized nothing, now but emptiness. A box filled with lies. I didn't say a word. Neither did Grandma. We didn't need to. The February air rushed in as we stepped outside. Crisp cold stinging my cheeks, but it felt clean. Pure. Like we had left the rot behind in that sanctuary. I guided Grandma carefully down the steps. She moved slowly, but her steps were sure. Above us, the gray clouds broke just enough for a sliver of sunlight to spill across the street, catching the snowflakes as they drifted down. She looked up at me, her pale eyes soft. "Sarah?" She said, her voice low. "Don't carry hate with you. Let the truth do its work." I nodded, my throat tight. "I will, Grandma. I promise." We reached my car, and I opened the passenger door for her. She settled in, folding her shawl over her lap. For the first time in a long time, she looked at peace. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away. In the rearview mirror, the church grew smaller, its white steeple cutting against the gray sky. Somewhere inside, my father was still standing by that coffin, the weight of his own choices pressing down harder than any cell bars ever could. And me, I felt lighter. Not because the hurt was gone, it never would be, but because the truth had been spoken, because I had stood tall, because Grandma had lived to see the lie undone. Revenge hadn't come in the form of chains or shouting or even justice in a courtroom. It had come in silence. In truth, revealed. In the sight of a proud man, broken not by me, but by his own reflection. And that silence was louder than any verdict. I don't know who might be listening to this tonight. Maybe you've carried your own silence, your own truth that no one else would face. Maybe you've been told you're not strong enough, not worthy enough, not enough at all. But hear me, the truth has a way of breaking through. Sometimes in whispers, sometimes in storms. But it will come. And when it does, you won't need to shout. Just stand tall. Because the loudest revenge is living, breathing proof.